I only bring up the Salma Hayek of it because she kept trying to convince me to be in the episode. She was like, you should act, Ally. Like, you should be like this little small character or this small character. And I was like, if she can't convince me to perform, then no one can.
Our guest today is Ally Pankiw, the director of the film I Used to Be Funny, as well as TV shows like Feel Good, Shrill, and Black Mirror. So I first became aware of you, and I vividly remember this only because of the context. It was one of the first days of the pandemic, and I watched all 6 episodes of Feel Good in one sitting. I actually have a viewing log, and it's the first thing in it. Anyway, and I remember seeing that you directed every single episode, and I was like, who is this person? And I remember looking you up because I was so impressed with that, and I saw that you were Canadian, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. So how did that all come about?
So Feel Good, yeah, as most people found it, they found it at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I think it was like hopefully very comforting, especially to queer people in that time. It was to me when it came out. But I had been working in Toronto and LA and doing a lot of like short form and narrative and branded work. And I was like really wanting to take the step into TV. But no one in the Canadian TV industry would hire me. And then May Martin called, and May and I knew each other just as like young queer people in our 20s and have known each other forever. And they moved to London, and I sort of went back and forth between Toronto and LA. And they were like, I got a show greenlit. And like, I've always loved May's comedy, and they had always loved my work and sort of like the tone of my directing. And they were like, would you pitch on it? And would you move to London for like 7 months? And I was like, yes, hell yes. I pitched my version of the show and got the job, and then did, 6 episodes of a Netflix series.
So what was your pitch when you were pitching the first season of Feel Good?
Well, I'm very type A, so it was like a 75-page visual and technical treatment about tone and how I would frame things and what sort of quote I was basing some of the visual language off of. Yeah, I really wanted to get the show, and I wanted to like leave no stone unturned. So I did this like massive pitch deck, and then I went to pitch it, and like Netflix and Channel 4 were like, you didn't need to do that. But I just really wanted to, again, it's something that May and I talked about before I pitched the show, but there's this quote that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. That quote sort of became a like tether for me when I was like building out sort of the psychology of the like visual language of the show. And I'm also, because I'm a writer as well as a director, anytime I pitch or work on or bring to life anything as a director, I'm doing it from a very like character-driven place and from a very story-driven place. The way that I sort of pitched bringing the show to life had to do a lot with like the psychology of the characters and how we would sort of like, make that visual and feed that to the audience. So that was a big part of it.
It was effective. I mean, that show really feels distinctive to me, which is I think really hard to do when there's like 70,000 shows on TV, but it really does stand out sort of as its own thing. Yeah.
That's very sweet. Thank you. I mean, a lot of that was also like just in the writing and in May, because like they're such a singular person and have such a singular brain that like how can it not feel, different from the stuff that surrounds it. So yeah. And then that sort of opened the door to all of my TV directing work that I've been doing since.
And a feature film, which premiered at South by Southwest earlier this year.
Yeah.
I Used to Be Funny,
Yes.
Which I loved. I watched it a couple nights ago.
Oh, thank you.
And it did sort of remind me a little bit of Feel Good. It centers on a Canadian comedian for one, but also like felt to me a lot about sort of recovery and reconnecting with yourself sort of at a certain moment in your life, which Feel Good, in its own way at least, is too. What were you trying to sort of express with I Used to Be Funny? Yeah,
so, what's funny is that I started writing I Used to Be Funny. It was called something else early on in its life cycle. I started writing that film in like 2013, 2014. And then I got Feel Good in like 2018, and it was like, oh, it's like so thematically like tied to my life and to my work. And so it was like lovely to get to do that and then return to my film after. But with I Used to Be Funny, I had just seen a lot of stories that centered around violence against women or women's trauma that were very sort of binary in the sense that either they were sort of like a revenge thriller and like, oh, healing comes through that, or like vengeance or justice, or they were like very, very heavy dramas, like devastating. And I just always have thought that like recovery lies somewhere in between. It's like a lifelong process, and there's lots of ups and downs, and there's moments of joy like and despair in it. And I wanted to speak to, sort of the fact that recovery can be all things at once, and that it's, I think, a little bit more commonplace than a lot of pop culture makes it seem, I guess. So that's where the initial idea for wanting to make the film came from. And like its themes are very personal to me, but like the plot itself isn't.
But it is very Canadian and very set in Toronto, which
yeah.
I loved as someone who lives here. You don't get to see Toronto that often. I was like, there's the park
always,
that
it's always masquerading as some other metropolitan city. So I also just like, this is where the first place, like I found my community and like my queer family and found family and started my career as an artist. And so I really wanted to showcase like especially the comedy community here in Toronto and show that it's a place with a lot of talent, and I really like shooting things here.
And it took 10 years then to bring it together, but you shot it in, I think, 19 days?
Yeah, we shot it in 18 and a half days. So classic Canadian indie, unfortunately, in that regard. It took, when you think about the ratio of like writing and pre-production and financing and that whole dance to like how long you actually get to make it, it's actually quite depressing.
And there is, you said that it generally, the plot doesn't mirror your own life, but there's one subplot in which one of the characters, played by Sabrina Jalise, who's amazing, where she gets a green card to move to the U.S., which I'm assuming in some way mirrored what your experience was? I
think it mirrors a lot of Canadian artists' like experiences. I currently have an O1, so I still go back and forth between Canada and the US. I think Sabrina has a green card. I actually can't speak to her experience, but I think a lot of Canadian artists, and I sort of mentioned it earlier, like I was very well poised to work in Canadian TV and direct a TV show here, and I had a ton of experience under my belt, and I was looked at as a risk. And I think a lot of the time in Canada, like emerging artists, new voices, different voices are looked at as like a risk as opposed to an opportunity. Like people don't really take a chance on people in Canada sometimes. I'm just speaking to me and my friends' experiences. So I think a lot of comedians and writers and directors, they go where there's more opportunities and there's maybe a less risk-adverse approach to developing young talent.
No, that's definitely true.
Like I had to go to London to get my first TV job, and now I can work anywhere. But
I am curious because I'm guessing based on your sort of filmography that you moved down there during a very tumultuous time to be a queer person in America or a queer Canadian. I'm really curious what that experience has been like over the past, I'm guessing like 6 or 7 years. Because I also feel like I lived there for a little bit, and I feel like they have this sort of utopic view of what Canada is for queer people, whereas I think it's actually a little bit closer than Americans think. But anyway, what was your experience like?
Yeah, I think like obviously Canada's not perfect by any means, but there is just like an underlying dread in America, I think, in terms of certain civil rights. When I started going down there more and more and spending more time there, I wasn't expecting to experience like culture shock, but there really is a bit of a culture shock. There's just like, I sort of describe it, and California is a bit of an exception to this, obviously, because California is very progressive, but like just underlying anxiety of like at any moment so much could be taken away from any person in that country. And so it's been strange being there because you're like, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, we can protect people's rights at a federal level. I feel very grateful that I still, have a home base here and I can come up here anytime I need to. But again, California is probably, we're very lucky there as queer people, as opposed to some people who live elsewhere in the States, especially right now. Yeah, increasingly.
Rachel Sennett is the star of I Used to Be Funny. She's incredible in this movie and everything that she does. What was it like working with her?
I say now my go-to line is like, if I would get hit by a bus for Rachel Sennett, like she is so incredible and she gave so much to the project. And she gives so much to like every project. She really throws her whole everything into it. She is obviously so funny and like enigmatic, and she's so charming. And I think in her previous roles, and also in Bottoms, which will be coming out this summer, which I got to see at South by, like you see that sort of like bombastic side of her, but she's also like an incredibly skilled like technician when it comes to acting. Like she's like a really incredible dramatic actress too. We'd been in a casting session together for something else in the States that I was attached to that didn't end up getting made, but she auditioned and I did a callback with her, and she was just like such a joy to work with and was like so good even in like a Zoom callback that I was like, oh, I kind of like want to steal her for my film. So we sent her the script and offered her the role, and she thankfully responded to the script and loved it. And I just feel lucky that we got her at the time that we got her, because I think now we would not be getting her to be in a Canadian indie, like low budget indie. So
You never know.
yeah, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, she's just as like lovely and funny as you'd think she would be. She's great.
I'm curious, because of Feel Good and I Used to Be Funny, have you ever done stand-up yourself?
No, God, no. I am not a performer. I never will be. I can't act. I can't do stand-up. I think writing comedy is a very different skill that I think maybe some people mistakenly think it would be just easy to translate it into the art of stand-up, but I think it's a very different skill set. I will stick to what I know, which is being behind a camera and on my laptop on set.
And directing stand-up very
And
well.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, Rachel and I wrote the stand-up in I Used to Be Funny together, but yeah, I would never perform it. Yeah, that will not be in my future by any means.
Do you want to talk about your experience on Black Mirror?
Yes, I do. That was such a great mix between sort of my TV work and my work on my own film. Because with that series, you get to take your episode and you do get to really approach it like your own little movie. So it was like a really wonderful experience of like getting to step into this like big machine and this like established brand, but then also get to like truly make your episode your own. In my episode, it's called Joan is Awful. It's like a very female-centric, female-driven comedy episode, and Salma Hayek's in it and Annie Murphy's in it. And I only bring up the Salma Hayek of it because she kept trying to convince me to be in the episode. She was like, you should act, Ally. Like, you should be like this little small character or this small character. And I was like, if she can't convince me to perform, then no one can. Not stand up, not acting. That's where I draw the line. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here with us, Ally.
Of course, it was a delight to be here in Queer. Yeah, thank you for having me.